What are we talking about today? Longines. Heritage. So Longines, huh? I think most of us are aware that they've been around forever. I remember this brand growing up, and in its heyday, they were very relevant and viewed as a luxury brand, mainly for dress watches. But fast forward to today, where they may not be as relevant, they're certainly not irrelevant, they have more of a cult following for those of us who are a little older. And as far as being a luxury brand, well, they're sort of all over the place with good intentions. I want to compare the Heritage with Frédéric Constant's Classic, because they both have some similarities. You know, I should have done a versus. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do a Longines versus Frédéric Constant, because I handled both of these watches on the same day, and here's what I mean. This is 40, how big?
42.
42?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a leather?
Made. It's a leather, yeah.
And automatic.
Yes, sir.
This is pretty sharp looking Longines.
I know. I like that, don't you?
Oh, so these have two crowns right there. What are those two crowns for?
You see, if you wanna have that 24 hours in the middle, you see the times is 12, 15, 30, 45.
Right.
You go around, you can keep two different time zones.
Oh, okay. So two. Okay.
You see what I mean? I would say I like the other one better.
You like the Frédéric Constant better than the Longines?
Because you know why Frédéric Constant, everything they do themselves.
So we talked about this one being for the younger demographics and this one being the Longines for the older demographics. Both watches are 42 millimeters and are competitively priced at $2,500 and $2,300 for the Heritage. The Frédéric Constant has a nice deep finishing to it. It uses a nice in-house movement, and there's guilloche on a dial, and its indices are hand applied. For a steel watch, it has a nice amount of heft to it. This watch has a luxurious look and feel to it versus the Longines Heritage, which lacks any detail, starting with the finishing. It's a lot shallower, if that makes sense, and the dial is devoid of any handwork. The indices are not hand applied, they are painted on. So in this regard, the Longines Heritage is inferior in build quality. That said, I still prefer the look of the Longines. I like that vintage look, and if you're someone who doesn't care about that level of details, then it's not going to matter to you. But if you're going to drop $2,000 on a watch, you should be aware of these kinds of details, because the watch is all about the details. Earlier, I mentioned Longines is all over the place in terms of being defined as a luxury watch, and I think they lack an identity.
Why don't you step out that ring, Stein? It's like ancient history.
Oh, ancient history, you know.
And that's because they try to appeal to every demographic by making a lower-end watch to an expensive line of watches. And I think when a brand does that, it's often ineffective. When a watch brand makes both a lower line of watches and a higher end of watches, it only benefits the customer buying the lower end of watches. For example, if I'm about to drop $10,000 on, say, a solid gold watch, I would not want that watch brand also making gold-plated watches. I wouldn't want someone wondering, oh, is that the gold-plated version or the real gold version? To me, it's just not worth it. Regardless of what some people might say, oh, just buy the watch that you want. When you're going to spend that kind of money, there shouldn't be any doubt within that brand of if it's gold-plated or a solid gold watch. And I think using both types of materials is one factor that is confusing for Longines. And now I want to segue into what I consider the most interesting part of what I just learned. And I'm going to use this clip to help set it up. What is the most significant story you can tell on Longines? Longines has been around for a long time.
Longines, all I can tell you, Chinese, this is all they buy, nothing else.
Longines?
Longines.
Longines uses a lot of ambassadors, and most of them are international by name and faces. Versus the US. And this is noteworthy because this sort of supports what I learned earlier about Longines' presence internationally versus in the US.
Let's fly away.
When that salesperson told me that he has a lot of Chinese customers who buy the Longines, he was not exaggerating. In fact, he and I talked a great deal off camera where he showed me his client book. I think that's what it's called. It's a list of his customers and their purchases so he can inform them the next time there is an event or a sale. And there were pages and pages of Chinese customers who bought those Longines watches. In fact, some of them were buying them in multiples of 8, 10, 12 watches. And very recently, because that promotion that they had on was very recent. The list of Chinese customers he had in his client book are different from Chinese Americans who live in the US. The list of customers he has are people who live in China and frequently visit the US specifically for these bulk purchases whenever a promotion or event happens, and they bring them back to China to sell them there. So that seller will take a lot of pictures with that salesperson, almost like it's a celebrity, with those watches to prove that that watch was bought in the US at a world-renowned department store, luxury department store, which is Bloomingdales. And that helps the seller sell those watches. Because as we saw, that watch is discounted to about $1,600, which makes it competitive with anywhere else like Joma Shop. So if I'm a buyer in China, what would distinguish me from buying the watch from that person from anywhere else? And that's because that watch is shown as being purchased from Bloomingdale's in the US. I think it's universal that we all seek some exclusivity with our watches, and that seller will probably sell it for about $400 less, and then pocket the remaining about $375, which still is not cheaper than anywhere else, but the prestige factor of it being bought from the US really helps a lot, and those sellers are successful at that. If I'm also in China and I want to just simply bypass that seller and buy directly from Bloomingdale's, well, the likelihood of me finding that sale or promotion that is going on, like the experienced seller, is not likely, because those promotions only happen a couple times a year. So if I wanted to bypass that seller and buy directly from Bloomingdale's, if that's possible, I most likely would have to pay full price. So that gives the other seller full leverage. So I thought that was interesting because I wasn't as aware that the demand for Longines in China was greater coming from a luxury department store versus any other online store. I'm walking Sam and I realized I forgot to film my outro. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time. What are we talking about today? Long what? Longines. So I want to segue. So I want to briefly compare the Classique with Frederic Constant's Classic. Oh man, I got that right. That name used to kick my butt.